started. We're really thrilled to have these two terrific photojournalists with us tonight, Cedeno and Wolfgang Schwan. I cannot thank you both enough for coming in. I want to thank our sponsors, which is Archive Magazine, Photo Shelter, Pro Photo Daily, Epson, and American Photography. This is our fourth night of our fifth week of doing this series of what's going on in Ukraine and the Russian war. So I thank everyone for coming in. I ask you if you feel like it, you can go to our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to see all these presentations within probably by Friday or Saturday. These two presentations will be up there, and you can subscribe when you get there. So, Wolfgang, it's all yours. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Frank. Wait, so I share my screen, correct? One moment. And I'm sorry, we just learned how to do this 1 minute ago before everyone got in here.
Don't let on, Wolfgang.
I'll be honest, I'm not the tech guy at all. But all right, so I started this out. My first time going to Ukraine was in January of this last year, and I had wanted to learn. I'd been watching the troop buildup sort of unfold for the third or fourth time. This had been a yearly occurrence since 2014-15, and wanted to, for myself, I wanted to go and learn more about what had been happening in the Donbass region. And my original goal was I wanted to go and work on a story revolving around coal mines and like the neglect and abandonment of them, and sort of polluted water seeping into the watersheds, and the ecological disaster that had been going on, and then like the looming sort of danger of this getting much worse if war did break out. But plans for that sort of fell through, and I ended up just doing kind of daily wire news from January into February until the war started, and then continued that until May at the end of my first trip. So for pretty much all of January and February, I got to spend almost every single day in the trenches with the young men and women of the Ukrainian armed forces on the front line in Donbass. And sort of, what is that going to happen every time that someone enters? Maybe, but anyway, so
I'll turn off that prompt. It's okay.
Oh, okay. It's not a biggie if it does, but so I learned a lot hanging out with the guys in Donbass, kind of hearing the reasons why they're there, why they're still there 6 years after, 7, 8 years actually, after like the initial, like the hard war, and this has turned into not a whole lot of action, very reminiscent of like World War I trenches, but both sides at this point, while I was there in the months leading up to the war, it was very quiet. It was kind of like here and there, someone would shoot a Kalashnikov towards the other side. It's like a, hey, we're still here sort of deal. But no real artillery until the days leading up to the actual invasion. But it was very interesting to get to hear a lot of the points of why these young men and women were doing it, and to just get to run around and make photos in a situation that I hadn't before. So this is just a little bit before the war, a handful of these photos. These are all between Stantia Luhansk, which was like the northernmost area that the Ukrainians covered, all the way down to Mariupol. These particularly in Zolotaire, which was next to Popasna, which was overrun by the Wagner group in, I believe, April, May area.
Wolfgang, you're not full screen again. Just go back to it. Just
the green dot.
Oh, give me 1 second.
There you go.
Cool.
Perfect. Oh no.
Oh, but then when I hit that, I apologize to everyone for my my lack in understanding this. Wait, so when I hit for the next thing,
Just hit the arrow. Don't hit the space bar, hit the arrow.
Arrows
The
do
cursor
that too.
keys.
I am hitting the cursor keys and it does that. Any key does that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we will live.
Oh,
like
you have
this.
to select all
This'll
the
be fine.
images, Wolfgang.
Oh, okay. All right. Problem solved.
Oh, yeah, select all.
Cool.
There you go.
There we
All
go.
right.
There you go.
Cool. All right, we're set. So yeah, these were all from January, February, leading up to the war, and just we would do a lot of 3-4 day stays with some of the soldiers, and get to get more intimate shots like this that weren't just sort of like the guy posing quickly with a gun in a trench, and getting to hang out and share meals with folks and getting to like share bunks with them.
So
And
Wolfgang,
then-
before any action is actually happening.
Yeah, so this is all January about 15th through the 23rd. Really, I was working out there, and actually this picture is the first time that it was about, if we had this minimized, it was about February 18th, 20th, somewhere in there. All of the Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk began shelling along the entire front line, sort of in a coordinated effort leading up to the invasion. So when we were out the one day, we came under heavy shelling at an area near Svitlodarsk and Novolugansk, which is sort of a little bit east of where Bakhmut is, which is one of the frontline cities right now. We had come under shelling and had to, just over the course of 4 hours, this went on, like move back, like from the basement that we're in this house to the next basement to the next basement, when there would be a pause in the fire until eventually we got to our cars. And this photo was taken while we were just hanging out, waiting for the shelling to stop for a brief moment. And this one, I don't think my cursor comes up, but the little entrance that those guys are standing by is like where we were staying for that last photo. And in the bottom right corner was like the closest round that had landed. So that was sort of my first experience under active shelling, and it wasn't the most reassuring thing to happen. And then to find out when you get back to your car that one of the tires is flat from that and you have to change it. In that situation, it was a little, it was a pretty exciting rite of passage, I guess, for first time being in that. But so this was the days leading up to the war. And then on the very first day of the war, I had been working with Alex Laurie and Justin Yao. I believe you had Alex on here. Alex was staying with me at a flat that I had rented in Bakhmut for those 2 months. And we were watching all of the channels on Twitter, on Telegram on the 23rd. And there was a lot of movement between all internet and cell phone access being restricted in the separatist areas and all along the Russian border, seemingly to not allow video or footage to get out of troop movement. The Ukrainians shut down every single airport, and there was a lot of stuff happening. They were like, this could be the day.
Yeah, and did everyone believe that it was going to happen, or was there a little bit of doubt? You know, like, can you give a sense of what the soldiers were feeling?
In my time there, from mid-January going up to the day of the invasion, it grew more and more and more, but not as much as you would think. And kind of the overwhelming sense that I got from a lot of people in Ukraine was that it was sort of like a boy that cried wolf deal. This has been happening for years, since 2014. The Russians would hold military training along the border. I think a lot of people, whether or not they had legitimate concerns about this and thought that it was going to happen, I think that it's just impossible to live with this looming fear, that to worry every single time that it does happen. So a lot of the civilian population I talked to didn't think that something would happen. Most of the military that I talked to either didn't, or like there wouldn't be much worry. In the military, it's a lot of like the sort of more gung-ho attitude on like, well, if they do, like, we'll march all the way to Moscow sort of thing. And so
You've gone out of full screen again, Wolfgang.
I think it's still when people join, it kicks me out. So we can just keep doing this. But leading up to like the week before this is happening, when Putin made his speech that he was recognizing the two republics, I think that the worry became much more serious and much more legitimate for a lot of folks. And it felt like something big was going to happen. And then on the 23rd, that evening, there was so much movement online that I think a lot of people thought that it surely would happen that night. Sure enough, it did. And Alex, I, and our colleague Justin Yao, we left Bakhmut early in the morning, and we had decided to go to Kharkov on the way to Kiev, because our thinking was that we need to be in the capital for this. Also, there's chatter that paratroopers are landing in like Borisville and north of the city as well, and maybe the city falls that day. No one really had any idea what was happening, so it's like that's where the story probably is. We need to be there. So Kharkov is on the E40 coming back from Donbass, and on the way we had seen lots of explosions in the sky as it was still dark out, and you would see flashes, which were probably cruise missiles hitting their targets. And once the sun had started to come up a little bit, probably at like 7-ish, 8 a.m., there was a large plume of smoke coming from the northwest as we're driving. And we sort of like located the direction of that on Google Maps on like what would be there. And it seemed to be a military airbase. And that seems like a likely target. And we decided we're going to try and get kind of near that, maybe make like a landscape shot, because the sun's still coming up, of this huge smoke plume that you can see for miles and miles and miles. And it just gets bigger and bigger as you drive more close to it. So as we're pulling into, like, we turn off of the main road to head in that direction, we just drive into a residential area that had been hit by some sort of missile within maybe 30-40 minutes beforehand, and that's this scene. So a missile, a very large one that left, this is like a 15-20 meter wide crater in the ground that probably had a water main, is why I'm assuming it was flooded, had landed directly in between two of these sort of Khrushchev-esque Soviet block apartment buildings. And this is where we had taken the photo of Elena that had made the rounds. And right when we had entered the area, she was kind of the first person that walked in our direction, which, like, not walking to us, just kind of like getting out of the area. We snapped a few frames of her and got her name and age, profession. And she sort of wandered towards the first responders that were all showing up to the scene. Someone had taken a little bit of care of her beforehand, judging by the bandage on her head, but she went and got some more care. Currently, I know that following that day, she dealt with a lot of issues in her eye, had to get a surgery. She was in Krakow. Last time I talked with her was like maybe 2 months ago, so I'm not sure if she's still in Krakow or not, but she's been doing like repeated eye surgeries to try and help out her vision issues that she's suffered from this. So there was there was a man here who had lost, there was the man crying, he had lost, I believe it was his son or his brother. There was like, we didn't have a translator with us on this day. So we weren't entirely sure of that, but it was seemingly a family member. And it later turned out, I did some work with soldiers in Chigoyev, which is this city right outside of Kharkov, probably in July, and had heard that these were the first civilian casualties of the war. That's what a soldier had told me. So like, I don't have a way of confirming that, but very likely that seemed to maybe be the case, because while this was all happening, we were very much in the mode on like, okay, we're going to limit this to 30 minutes shooting this, and then we're going to move to Kharkov, because this scene is probably what we're seeing all over the entire country. This is the first hours of the war. We happen to stumble into this in like the first 2-3 hours that Russia has invaded, and to us, it's like the whole country is probably being slammed with cruise missiles right now. These are probably landing in every city all over the place. Like, this is just Chigoyev is like maybe 100-200,000 people, as like a big sort of suburb city right outside Kharkov. So if this looks like this, what did the major cities look like? And it wasn't sort of till like that night, the next day, that we saw that there wasn't too much civilian destruction that had happened. It was mostly targeted attacks on air bases. I'm not sure if this was an attack on, this missile was intended for the local air base, or we now know that Russia has no issues just launching missiles and rockets and artillery into civilian areas. So it could have been that. It could have been intended for the air base. I don't think that there's a way to know. But so for a bit, we had run around in this complex with police officers and first responders, as they were, a lot of the doors in the buildings had been damaged from the shock waves, and the police would try to break these down to get any survivors out or folks that had been injured. This guy had pretty serious gash to the back of his thigh from some glass that had become shrapnel from the shockwave, and they had to escort him out. He had a hard time walking by himself, and then he was treated by first responders. These are just sort of some of the what happened inside of the apartment. So you can imagine if you were asleep on a bed or a couch in one of these, like how catastrophic that would be. That the missile didn't even directly impact these buildings, but just completely ruined the insides of them. And there's a lot of people throughout this whole war. You've kind of seen being near windows or being near glass is like a serious danger. And one of the interesting things I've seen kind of all over Ukraine is people take masking tape or duct tape, and they'll make like big X's, or they'll do like a grid pattern on the windows. And that's like with the intent of when an explosion happens nearby, it'll sort of keep all of the glass together, kind of like how like a modern windshield in a car works. So it doesn't all just shatter and turn into sharp projectiles. So
just a question. Before you're going into a zone like this, do you decide I'm going to cover the event as it's happening, or like, because some of the work we've seen is storylines, like I'm going to cover a nurse, I'm going to go to a small town and document that. Is your thinking I'm going to go wherever the story is happening? How do you work?
So mostly like these days, the first little bit of the war, it was all like reactionary spot breaking news sort of coverage. So primarily like missile strikes in the first like week, and then we get to a few hospital days, some Irpin, and kind of like I'm shooting for the wire. So it's those photos aren't being used for a storyline. They're being used for any publication in the world that is running a story about Ukraine or about a specific thing there. What are the most useful photos for today or for this week that can be used by anyone? So in the opening day of the war, it was the photos of like one of the first missile strikes in a civilian area. That was the story, and we happened to just stumble into it. And then over the course of the next week, a lot of it was the civilians that are hospitalized, the different missile strikes in and around Kiev, just kind of showing the damage to buildings and seeing the people around it, like this child on the swing, and kind of the life carries on through all of this chaos. But yeah, so for the majority of the time that I have spent there, it's all been sort of the grinding daily news photography, like the what is going to be useful for the media in the world this week or today.
Right. Okay.
Some of it is more pointed, like we'll get to. On this last trip, I did some stuff with like EOD teams. I did some stuff with the farmers to learn a little bit more about that. And I have done like a fair amount of hospital stuff, but for the most part, it's like sort of reactionary coverage.
Thanks.
And then, yeah, so we had gotten to Kiev, and this is the following morning. This is on the 25th. A missile or rocket of some sort landed right at the base of an apartment building. I don't remember off the top of my head if there was casualties that day or not, but it left extensive damage, and there was a child playing on a swing there. So during all of these days, the first day on the 24th through about like 2 weeks later, the main train station in Kiev, was packed full of civilians fleeing and either heading west just to go to Lviv, head to any one of the Zhytomyr or any of the cities and towns that were just outside of Kiev. I think a lot of people were very worried about the prospects of Russia coming in, surrounding the city, what would happen here. So people would be taking their kids a lot of the time. Or really no men were allowed to leave the country. So some would board trains just to see that their family got to the border with Poland, or they made it to wherever their family is going in Lviv or other cities in the country. But there was a lot of, some of the more moving moments that I witnessed in my entire time there would be two parents loading their kids up on a train in the beginning of this war when it was so crazy and no one had any idea what was going to happen, because once this broke out, it was myself, all of us kind of thought that Ukraine was going to crumble in a matter of days and maybe weeks. And this is surely like the might of the Russian military that we've all thought was maybe the greatest in the world or the second greatest, certainly a powerhouse, wouldn't be stopped by a small country like Ukraine. So I think the kind of the bravery and like the heroism to load your kids onto a train and not know if you'll ever see them again, but kind of like need to know that they're getting out of harm's way is just like such a powerful act to witness parents do. And then, so we saw a lot of that. Lots of this is a group of kids that their parents were waving goodbye to. I believe like a few classmates. I don't think they were all from the same parents, but for quite a few days we had covered the train station there, and then that leads up to about 2 weeks into the war. We get to the Irpin bridge that I'm sure all of you have seen by now. So north of Kiev, Irpin, Bucha, Gostomel are all little suburb towns that literally border the city. At the end of Irpin is Kiev city. They all sit inside of Kiev Oblast, which is the state province. And the Ukrainians had preemptively blown this bridge south of Irpin before it goes into Kiev district of the city. And it happened to be like the main sort of like floodgate for all of the civilians that still wanted to evacuate the area. This bridge had been blown kind of before most of the population had time to react and make up their minds if they had wanted to leave or not. So like in the very first day of the war, a lot of people left. And then after that, a lot of people in like the outlying towns and whatnot were like, maybe we'll see like how far the Russian forces get, how close the fighting gets. And by the time that it got to these three towns or small cities, it was a little bit too late, and the Ukrainians had blown up this bridge in worries that the Russians would just come in very quickly. So it caused sort of like a bottleneck for civilians to not get out as hastily as I think that many people would like. And it became kind of the focus of reportage for about 2 weeks. So these are just some scenes from, yeah.
Yeah, just a question. Like, we all thought that this was going to be over in a few days, maybe a week, 2 weeks, right? How does that transform, the journalists that you're with to say, wow, this is not happening that way? And like, in your own head, this can go on, and now you're there for a month, right? Like, what's the change, or is there a change in how you guys are reporting it and covering it, thinking, wow, these Ukrainians are incredible in their resilience? Like, is that part of the conversations you're having in the evening with your fellow journalists?
Absolutely. I think in like the opening days and like really like the opening like first 2 weeks, really, it was like just constantly watching the maps and seeing like where the Russian forces were pushing. And there was kind of this worry. The Russian forces made it as far down as the E40 on like the Zhytomyr highway, which is the main highway heading west from Kiev. And there was a big worry that the city was going to be surrounded for about like 2 to 3 weeks. And after like about the 3-day mark, it kind of became a little obvious that this isn't going to happen as fast as we thought it was. And then a little bit later than that, it was just like there was something, the Russians aren't doing anywhere near as well as what we all thought. There's something going on here, and the Ukrainians are doing much better than we had all thought. And kind of, it ended up that the Ukrainians vastly exceeded everyone's expectations, and I'm sure even their own. I think that there's probably not many times in history that like a people and a nation has like risen to this occasion, to this level, and like really stood up against such insane odds. And a big part of that is like we've all sort of found out along this is like that maybe there's just this facade with the Russian military and Russia in general that we severely overestimated them, and we did underestimate Ukraine, surely. But it come to find this is going to be kind of a thing for the history books. Like none of us are going to be able to report on this today or this year. It's going to have to be like the Russian generals with their tell-all 20 years from now on like the levels of corruption and selling off tank parts or fuel or what it is, or the neglect of training, or kind of fluffing the numbers of troop sizes and training levels, competence levels. But there was it seemed that almost every opportunity the Russians had to fumble, they fumbled, and the Ukrainians just did an exceptional job of capitalizing on every single failure that the Russians had this entire war. So
and so when you're talking to your editor back here in the States, are you sort of asking those kind of questions, or are what we're witnessing right? You know, just from a broader view of the news that is coming out of the world, you guys are like right there. But the broader information gathering, your editors are telling you, no, it's right. I mean, the Ukrainians are standing up. You know that you have to stay longer. I mean, how did you have conversations like that as well?
No, my main staying longer conversation was with my little brother who'd been watching my dog. But that was the main concern. He ended up watching him for like 4.5 months, and it was supposed to be like 3 weeks. But so I think it just amongst like the editors, all of the other journalists, like the Ukrainians that we're talking to, it was sort of like a huge worry in the beginning, and then like a surprise at like why this isn't going the way any of us thought that we would too. At this point now, it's like Ukraine could push Russia out of the war like this winter. Like it's entirely possible. I mean, maybe by next year they take Crimea back. Ukraine is doing exceptional right now, and it's like, I mean, we just all saw the development this week of Russia's now mobilizing an additional 300,000 people that won't have adequate training. They won't have gear. They sent their 175,000 best soldiers and best equipment, and a lot of that has been mauled in the past 6-7 months now, and they're just going to be sending in cannon fodder to this. And I don't see any of the logistical issues. I don't see any of the morale issues. I don't see any of the command issues being fixed with 300,000 brand new soldiers who have never fought before. And Ukraine is getting better armed every single week and month that this war goes on, as long as interest stays high from the international audience, mainly the US, the UK, and the Baltic countries for the most part. But as long as this keeps being justifiable to us taxpayers and it keeps being in the news, I think that most people view this as a necessary fight and a necessity for why our gas prices are real high right now, like why it hurts to go to the grocery store.
Okay.
But yeah, so anyway, this is these are some frames from in-ear pin at the bridge. Lots of people brought their pets, which of course is a heartwarming thing to see. Lots of cats in bags, lots of dogs being carried. This woman's not injured. There's a lot of elderly that weren't able to like walk across this kind of just like destroyed bridge zone, which is a lot of rubble. It's a lot of like unsecure footing. So you would have a lot of babushkas that would just be carried on stretchers or on someone's back, or like 4 guys like holding a wheelchair, like sort of trudging across this like uneven slope with water running next to them. And this was a Russian POW from the fighting in Bucha. He had been captured, and these are some territorial defense guys, the Kiev militia, that carried him off to their lines. And the entire time that civilians are pouring in and heading towards Kiev to get onto buses and then later trains to head to wherever they're going, there's just a constant stream of military, of Ukrainian, actual Ukrainian armed forces, and the different militias or just volunteers with guns that are all like have the yellow or green or blue tape, depending on what week it was, that are just going in the opposite way to head into where the fighting is. And there had been the whole time there had been like airplane activity. So there was a few soldiers that were armed with, these aren't Stinger missiles, but some sort of surface to air shoulder fired missile that we're keeping a watch out. This is when we would cross over the bridge and head into the town of Irpin, there would be regular kind of seemingly random shelling that would happen. And pretty much every time that you hear like the initial outgoing boom, and then like sometimes you'd hear a whistle, like everyone would hit the ground. So this was a line of civilians that are walking towards the direction this camera is facing is heading the direction of the bridge. So we were walking in towards the town. These people are fleeing, and you would hear some indication of something might land near us, and like everyone hits the dirt. Fortunately, nothing landed near us at that moment. And then this is in the actual town. So lots of the buildings are completely destroyed, and people are still making their way out with whatever they can carry on their back or drag on wheels. This is just inside a home in Irpin. And then so this was, I'm jumping around a little bit here, but just like with the order of how I have everything, it doesn't make sense to just jump back to this. But so where the smoke is rising is maybe this was in late March, I believe. There's still fighting happening. This is before the Russians left Kiev, or I mean Bucha and Irpin and Gostomel. The smoke is rising from the Gostomel area. There was a lot of like fuel caches in that area around the airport that would sporadically be hit by artillery or fighting, and you would have these huge plumes of smoke that would last like a day. And we had tried to get a shot like this for a few days in a row. Svet, who you had on here, or you're having on here, and our friend Alex Kent, we kind of just went like building to building, asking if we could, asking the security guys like, hey, can we go up the elevator, get on the roof of this? And eventually one of them said yeah, and we got these sort of landscape shots of just how immense these smoke clouds are from the fuel burnings.
Wow.
And then we get to the first or second week of March. Alex Laurie and I and another colleague of ours, Diego Herrera, headed out to Kharkov for the first time since the war had started, and besides the first day. Kharkov had been much more badly hit by artillery, by missiles, pretty much this entire time than Kiev had been. And the fighting actually got into the city a little bit in the first 2 weeks. There was a few pushes by the Russians where they made it like a kilometer or so like inside the city line. And then throughout like the first 3 months of the war, the city got badly hammered by just artillery. The Russians made it in, sort of made like a crescent perimeter around the city where they were able to fire howitzers like pretty much unobstructed throughout most of the city. They were in I believe like within a 12-kilometer range of almost everything, and could unimpeded just rain hell down on the inhabitants of this city. So this is in next to an administrative building of sorts. This was some sort of military outpost that had been hit, and there was a flag hanging in the window. This here was a building that had a bar in the basement that sat catty corner to the main administrative building that a lot of us have seen in Kharkov in their downtown. The thought was maybe that this large missile was intended for the administrative building, but it ended up hitting this building next to it. Or again, it could just be the Russians randomly lobbing ballistics into the city. But There was a lot of days that the firefighters here are the ones that have to, the city is like burning down. There's constantly buildings falling, buildings on fire, and sort of the firemen are working nonstop in this area. So we thought for a few days it was very important to highlight the work that these guys were doing, just relentlessly digging people out of buildings or putting out fires so it doesn't burn down the whole block. This, I thought it was interesting that there was like a Poe painting in the middle of a bar in Kharkov. At some point while we were with these guys that day, the air raid siren went off after this missile had landed about an hour beforehand. We had to jet down to a neighboring building. There was a basement that was deep enough to be used as a shelter, and that's where we were for this photo. This was also one of those days. I believe this was an infirmary that had been struck in the roof by rockets in the morning. And again, firefighters are there making sure that it doesn't ignite neighboring buildings. This lady had lived next door to that building and her roof was also damaged early in the morning and was completely beside herself, being woken up to explosions and fire, and was being consoled by one of the firefighters when we made this frame. These are some hospital photos of some of the civilians that had been injured in Kharkov from shelling or from just fighting while fleeing. And this young man's name is Sasha. He was 16, and really heartbreaking that he was, his main passion had been dance, and he was on the dance team of his school, and he ended up losing his leg from a very serious injury from Russian shelling. I have this guy's name written down somewhere, but not with me. He had been fleeing one of the more northern villages outside of Kharkov. He was heading down into the city with his family, and ended up being the sole survivor of his mom, his dad, and he had a younger sister that they came under fire from, I believe, it was either it was some sort of tank or a BMP, but it was the machine gun that was on top of it. And a bullet had gone through the door of the car and it hit his side, which was a 50 caliber round that they dug this out of this kid. And fortunately for him, the round was slowed down enough through the door that even though it entered him, it didn't blow a basketball sized hole through him, like what this round would if it was unimpeded. But it was really interesting hearing a lot of the horror stories like that this kid had to deal with his entire life is turned over. He just lost his entire family, but there was a huge sense of like unity and like perseverance, and just like we're gonna overcome this, like no matter what we lose attitude from many Ukrainians that I talked to. Kind of the first like few weeks that this war had broken out, anyone that you would talk to, it was like 100% in that like Ukraine is going to win this, like our people are unbeatable. It was a really special like time, and special might be the wrong word, but like a very just like unbelievably inspiring time to be present in that place during this. Like the closest thing that I can like relate it to is like I was a child, but when 9/11 happened in the US, it was kind of like everyone here is American and like we're gonna get through this and like we're one people and we'll do this all like as Americans and come together. And it was very much like that sense. And even though he had just like lost everything, he was still like overly not he couldn't stop talking about how like Ukraine would win this, and like did we believe that, because like he does. And it's really interesting to see that sentiment from people who have just had their whole world rocked from war. These two women had also had invited us into their home after a shelling hit another administrative or military building. They had their windows blown out from that, but luckily it was just a bunch of broken glass and nothing too severe. These are from outside of Kharkov in April, there had been a counterattack by Ukrainian forces, and they'd retaken a handful of villages and Chigoyev area. And so this village is this is Malarhan, and it's on the highway to Chigoyev, which is where the photos that we had from the very first day of the war were. The Russians had occupied this from within like the first week or two of the fighting. And then it was cleared a couple of days before we had gone here. Here is one of the famous Russian tank turrets that seem to just pop off of the tanks whenever they're hit. And that's because of the autoloader mechanism. They sort of have the rounds revolve around the bottom of the turret on a track that loads them into the cannon. They fire off, and whenever they're hit by explosives or by javelins or NLAWs or whatever it is, all of those rounds are in a position that they all detonate when the tank detonates, and it launches the turret off of the vehicle. So we noticed when we would go to villages, this was, I think, the first time that I'd come across this, but the amount of soldiers that the Russians left behind was kind of, I don't know if it was shocking to me. It was definitely not what I expected to see. There didn't seem to be a lot of regard for human life from the Russian military standpoint, whether that's like obviously dealing with shelling of civilian areas, but even for their own soldiers, they would seemingly have no issue leaving them behind when they would die. So in this area, there was a few dozen Russian soldiers who were in and out of the buildings that the Ukrainian soldiers sort of toured us through, or in the tree lines. These are just the Ukrainian servicemen that are kind of touring us around this village. This is another Russian soldier in this. I'm not sure what type of agricultural field this is, but it borders that village. And then throughout the sort of village that all of these Russian outposts had been, I ran into like the first gas masks that I had seen since the war had started. And there was a very surprising amount of them. It seemed to be like at least one per soldier that would have been there, and lots were abandoned. And it sort of gave me a worry for about like a week or two until I got my agency to send me one. On why do all these guys have these? Like, do I need one? Like, are they planning on using chemical weapons? What are they prepared for with this? But luckily that has not transpired yet. In that village, this woman, even 5 days after the liberation, she still was choosing to stay down in a shelter it was some sort of food storage behind her home that sat a little bit below ground. And then we move on to once the Russians had left the Kiev, Sumy, and Chernigiv oblasts in the springtime.
Yeah, Wolfgang, how far,
Yep.
how many days behind are you from, can you say that you are from this action? Because someone has a question that doesn't seem to be, fires or, things burning as you're coming through. So is this a day later, 2 days later from when this?
So all of this village had just sort of been hammered the entire 2 months of fighting, kind of from both sides, because it was a frontline village. So like the Russians would be firing out of it, the Ukrainians would be firing in, I'm assuming. So all of that, it's very hard to say. It was cleared by the Ukrainians, I think 4 days before we entered.
Okay.
And then this is in Chernigiv. So this city had been surrounded in the opening days of the war. It sits on the eastern bank of the Dnipro, north of Kiev. Not very far. I believe it's like within 50 or so, like under 100 kilometers from the border. And very quickly, this had been surrounded, but it was never taken. It was sort of just sieged by the Russians. And they fired into the city a lot. I don't know. We spent 2 days here. I did not get dates on like what damage was from exactly what date. They had been dealing with this for close to 3 months. So we sort of just toured with a press officer on a lot of the more dramatically damaged buildings. One of the things that this is one with like the walls blown off in the stairwells. And it's through a window of the same complex. But so then we get to, this is the hospital in Chernigiv in the city. And they had, because they were surrounded, they didn't have access to any amenities coming in or support coming in from Kiev. They had their water lines hit in this hospital, they had electric hit, and they had gas hit. And so this hospital operated for 3 months dealing with wounded soldiers, wounded civilians with no basic utilities. They would have all of their water that came in that they could clean surgical equipment, came in by donation by bucket from the civilian population surrounding the hospital, and they would boil it by fire down in the basement to just clean off surgical utensils. And also they used cell phone lights on their iPhones to do surgeries in dark rooms for close to 3 months, which was just absolutely incredible to hear those stories. This woman was at this hospital as well. She had an injury to her hand and her eye from glass being turned into shrapnel from shelling. And then we get to, this is Irpin and Bucha after they're liberated. This guy was showing us his apartment that was up on a 13th floor or so in the Irpin, and that's looking out towards Bucha there. So those buildings that are in the distance, that's Bucha, and we're standing in Irpin. This is the infamous church now in the middle of Bucha where the mass grave was. And so we toured around the city once the authorities were looking for all of the people who had been killed or had died for whatever reasons. And I made my way around with a group of police officers who were Kiev Oblast State Police. And it was their job to, they go around, they find where bodies are through, they get a list from some commander on, this person gave us a tip for this, you need to go here. They show up at the location, and it's their job to write down the exact address, the coordinates on where this person was, what property they're on, what they're wearing. Is this a male, female, roughly what the age is? Are there any sort of documents on them? Because the issue was that most people didn't have ID, and family has fled the area, and like maybe some of these bodies have been here for a month. And so like decomposition has started. How are we going to identify these people? So it was, they would fill out these forms and they put it into the body bag later on. And hopefully then when family comes back, these people can be identified. I don't know what the number is at now on who has been identified, but I think once mostly everyone was accounted, it was close to 400 people that had not been identified yet. This was a woman who had hanged herself, or I don't think that she had been intentionally hanged, that was in the scene. And these are the officers that are sort of gathering everyone and documenting this. And again, and then this is at the graveyard, sort of like where everyone ends up. And then there's sort of the deceased will be like laid out, and hopefully in like the next few days, they will be further cataloged through photo, and then like that's put into like a database that everyone needs to be buried. You can't just like leave everyone out on in this field, in this cemetery. So they have to be buried, but they would do further cataloging in hopes of identification. This is on the day of the when they exhumed the grave at the main church in town, and lots of just residents of Bucha, of Irpin, family members would come, many grieving heavily to see if any of their loved ones were there. This man had found the body of his brother, was buried here in this mass grave. This is a grave that was outside of the mass grave, just like an independent single grave. But this was the son or the grandson. I didn't remember exactly what the translation was of her, but a family member that had passed. And then these are also onlookers while the grave is being exhumed. This is the only picture that I have in here. So they had shortly after this, I believe it was like a week and a half or 2 weeks afterwards, Eastern Orthodox Easter was carried out at this church. And it was very moving to see the amount of many people had started to come back because the Russians had withdrawn and were returning to this area. We're returning to a lot of the surrounding areas of Kiev. And the turnout in this community for Easter Sunday was just absolutely breathtaking. There was hundreds and hundreds of people, like probably 500 residents or just supporting community came out, and all like grieved together, all sort of just came together in a unifying way, in support of one another and what had just happened, like with the horrors that had just happened right outside the walls of this church. It was very moving to see. This is just I like this picture of a Volkswagen bus on one of the bridges between Gostomel and Busha. And here is Borjanka, which is a city north of, it's on the same highway line as Bucha and Gostomel that goes into Kiev and had some of the more spectacular destruction as far as buildings. So one of the really interesting things to me while I was spending this time in Ukraine was that even through all of the war happening, how like tidy and like quick to clean up Ukrainians are. I think that Ukrainians are like a very tidy group of people that don't like every car that I gotten in the entire time that I was there was like immaculately clean. Like there's no dust on anything. Like the floor mats like always look fine. Like there's no trash in anyone's cars. When I was working in Donbass in January and February, I would get like mud on my arms from walking through like narrow trenches. And then you would go to the store later in the day and some stranger grabs you and like they're like whacking the dirt off of your arm. And like I think everyone just likes to see each other and their spaces be clean. And throughout all of like the destruction of this, as soon as a village is liberated or as soon as it's safe, everyone's picking up the pieces very quickly. And here firefighters they're trying to get all this rubble up to unearth it in hopes of finding out if there's any probably not survivors, but if there are bodies underneath here from this building collapsing. But regardless of that, like there's all of these bricks get put into an organized pile. And I'd seen at like some houses and villages, like where a house had been leveled and within like a week or two, there's organized piles of like, these are stones, these are bricks, these are like pieces of wood, like these are like the tiles from the roof are like all cleanly and neatly organized. And like even in Kharkov in the middle of like all the shelling, like roadwork crews are like milling and paving like highway around the city. And it was like it was really interesting to see like people staying busy, like not necessarily like normalizing this, but like giving themselves a job and being like, we need to carry on. And also just like the needing to keep life, like we're not going to let this like tear us apart on like a fundamental level of like who we are, was quite interesting. This is, I think, my favorite photo of like that I've taken in Ukraine. So after the Russians had left Kiev, Sumy, and Chernihiv Oblast, on a lot of the highways, there was destroyed Russian vehicles. And this is the E40 that comes from Lviv to Zhytomyr and then into Kiev. It's in between Zhytomyr and Kiev is where this was. Lots of the people that are returning would see these destroyed vehicles of the Russian force that had come in, forcibly distressed you, is harming your country, forced you to flee your city, your home, your family, your friends, and potentially go live in a refugee status in another country. And now you're returning and you get to see this sort of pop-up monument that it is a testament to your side beating back this aggressor, right? And these sort of became like pop-up, like little like photo shoot spots for people. You would have like moms taking photos of like both of their kids sort of like hanging off of the cannon on the tank, or like selfies between like a boyfriend and girlfriend, just like family photos at these. And it's sort of like like we're standing up to this, like we're winning sort of thing. Like, look, like Russia couldn't keep us away from home, like as people are returning. So it was a really like cool and beautiful, like in a obviously not ideal situation thing to see, like but very interesting to see how people reacted to this. And this frame sort of came to fruition while we're there, and I just thought it was like a wonderful, like this is 2022, and like don't we all like inserting ourselves into the situation. Like we all take like selfies of ourselves like when we're out to eat or like we're hanging out with friends, and like this woman is just doing like the cool like sexy pose for her boyfriend or social media or whatever this is, and with the iconic Lada driving by. This was, yeah, definitely like the image that I'm happiest with from all of this.
Wow.
And I think it just shows how awesome the Ukrainian people are, and like they're just going to keep trucking no matter what.
Beautiful.
So on this most recent trip to Kiev, I spent a lot of time in Kharkiv again, and there's a northern neighborhood, Saltivka, where we spent a decent amount of time with people who had chosen to stay throughout all of the worst months of the war, and this was the worst hit neighborhood of the city. Because they're the most northern part of the city, they've just been shelled relentlessly for months, and now they lacked water, electricity in a lot of areas, and these guys had gone to show us how they fill up their water bottles to bring back water for cooking and whatnot. And all of them were drunk most of the days that we went, and we're just like real hospitable and like excited, but like also like very intoxicated every time we would talk to them. Boatloads of fun. But while they were showing us this, they all proceeded to like start bathing there, and it was like one of those like amazing moments that us photographers sometimes have, where it's just like, I cannot believe this is transpiring in front of me and I get to photograph this. It's just like incredible, these guys bathing one another. This was another woman who had chosen to stay in this area that was shelled almost 24/7 for 3 months, and was part of a portrait series that I was working on and would like to continue. So kind of getting towards the end of this, but this is I had gone and done a few weeks in Donbass this summer, and shortly after the Zelensky administration had made a mandate that everyone in the region needs to leave. So they offered to pay everyone with the equivalent of like $150 to vacate the area, head west. $150 like doesn't sound like a lot. In Ukraine, it'll get you an apartment for a month and a half, maybe get you some food as well. So at least like you have a place to sleep if you don't want to sleep at like a sort of like community hall or like a site for refugees. You could get your own spot for you and your family. So we go to this village, and the police have orders to hand these out. It's the order. We had run into like this large crowd gathered, and a lot of them began lamenting about an NGO group that had come, some humanitarian group had come and had promised to take away this this litter of puppies. And they're all complaining to this cop that like, why are you trying to get us to leave? Like these puppies are still here. The mom died. We can't leave if these puppies don't leave. Like you have to like make sure that they're safe. And the cop is losing his mind on like, I'm risking my life coming out here to like the very front line in this gray zone. Like there's shelling happening down the street. Like I don't care about the puppies. Like, I just need to get a human being in my car so that like I can get you out of here and get back to my kids. And like no one was having it. They wanted the puppies to be saved. But it was really interesting seeing the people that chose to stay throughout all of this. And it can be whatever reason. It can be the puppies. The one guy that we ended up taking with the police, this guy, he had his peach tree finally got hit. And that was like the one thing in the world that was keeping him stuck to this village that was in danger nonstop since kind of the fighting began. This is all north of Slavyansk. And we talked to a woman who she didn't want to leave because she had planted tomatoes a month ago and she wasn't going to let someone else eat her tomatoes. But as silly as like all of like the kind of more comical things that you hear for like what's keeping people there, and you think like that doesn't make sense. It's like I would have to like constantly remind myself on how terrifying it is to like step off into the unknown when it's just like you have your own house here, like you don't know where you're going. Like, are you going to get a job where you're going? Do you have a roof over your head? Do you have to sleep in a giant hall with like 400 other people that are also displaced? Like, do you need to leave the country? Like, how is the rest of Europe or wherever you're ending up going to treat a refugee? Are you going to have work there? Like, can you speak the language? Like, where's the rest of your family? So as silly as a lot of these, like the tomato excuse or like the puppy is, it is a very personal and legitimate decision to stay, even as like absurd and terrifying as it might seem to a lot of us in the moment. So when people would though leave these areas, they all sort of funneled to the Pokrovsk train station, which is in Donetsk region, and then from there they would head west. So these are some scenes from the train station there this summer. There would be a few hundred people most days, sort of filtering to these trains to get out. This woman brought her parrot, was her one possession she decided to bring to get out of the country with her. And these are just like, I didn't throw a lot of the military ones in here, but I thought that these were kind of interesting to see in like 2022. This is a 18-year-old serviceman who is coordinating or flying a little commercial drone that they use, both sides use, the Ukrainians and the Russians will use these now for artillery coordination. And it was just really interesting to see this like little like $1,000 drone that like all of us journalists use from time to time, and then is being used like in wartime, because that's the technology that we have now. You don't have to have some guy with binoculars super close to coordinate artillery, and either you're watching troop movement or you're like waiting to see like when the enemy fires, trying to find where that smoke came from, and the tree lines around wherever you are. It was pretty interesting. This is a day that a group of the Kiev Territorial Defense who had moved out to Kharkov, they were training on how to use the drones. And here's just a couple photos of when we were out with military on this last time. This is a missile strike recently in beginning of August in Kharkov, and a man cleaning up the mess. Here is, I had done a little bit on the farming issues. There, we've all heard about the grain shortages that are coming now to the rest of the world. And one of the things that I learned while here and talking to these farmers isn't that there's no shortage of grain in Ukraine. The amount of wheat fields that have been destroyed or harvests that have been destroyed is like next to completely insignificant, like less than a fraction of a percent. The big problem is all of this has been harvested and there's not transportation infrastructure to get this out of the region and then out of the country. Traditionally, all of this goes down to the Sea of Azov and then the Black Sea, or straight down to the Black Sea. But because of the Russian blockades, with the exception of a couple ships have gone through now, none of this can go that way. So there's not the rail infrastructure to send all of this out into Poland, into Romania, into Moldova or Hungary. And if they were able, the international buyers, which is mostly the Kiev government, and then they sell it out, isn't paying the extra amount to ship this by land, and it costs much, much more. So either the farmers can go bankrupt and make $0 not selling any of the grain but having it, or they could pay 10 times what they would like lose 10 times the amount of money paying to ship it out, which is they can't do that. So all of this grain is just sitting in Ukraine at the moment. Was a surprising development for me to learn about. And we had done a handful of days with just farmers out there. This was an area where there was shelling down the road at the next farm, but we weren't allowed to get through the checkpoint to get over to where that smoke was coming from. And then this is the last slide that I've got. But this is a EOD, part of SDNS, which is like the rescue services, which incorporates the fire companies. kind of any of like the first responders, EMSs and all that. EODs fall under that in Kharkov. And I was learned that these guys, even prior to this war and prior to 2014 when fighting happened, the Kharkov EODs had 200 plus days of work a year still cleaning up ordnance from World War II. And that was a bit of a shock to me that they're working that often still digging up German and Russian ordnance from the two big battles when the Germans pushed into Russia and then when the Russians pushed the Germans out. There was serious fighting in and around Kharkov, that now they're going to be doubled down on the amount of work for potentially the next maybe 80 years if they're still working on it that long. So that is one that we got to go out with them for one day. This guy's just picking a bit of a rocket out of the road, but going back, I would like to do a bit more on those guys. So that's all my pictures. I apologize that it was like 100 and not 20, but it was kind of a bit of a touch on everything because I was doing just like daily wire news.
Well, Wolfgang, I can't thank you enough for doing that. And I hope you can stick around so we can do some Q&A afterwards with everyone. But I'd love to just work right into Kenny now so that while everyone is still around, that'd be really important. But great presentation. I mean, unbelievable footage there. Thank you so much.
Nice, Wolfgang.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I can. You get to share your screen.
Okay.
And, we go right into it. Ken Cedeno. Thank you, Ken, for being
All
here.
right. Thank you very much for everybody for being here. Let's see, where is, thought I had it right here. Oh, here we go. Okay. So I actually made my way out. I wanted to go out there in the beginning of the war, actually, when Wolfgang was out there and Alex Kent and a few of our other friends, and they kept calling me and saying, hey, come on out. And I really wanted to go, but I had a lot of things to do. And eventually I finally made it out there April 21st, and I was only out there for 1 month. And I would like to go back as well. But so we didn't have anything particular to concentrate on. We just went out there and asked around, checked with journalists nearby, checked with local people to find out what was going on, to see what was of interest besides the regular things that were going on. And so what we started out doing primarily was funerals and burials. This is right in Bucha.
And Ken, how many people are you traveling with?
I initially went there to meet up with Carol, and Paula Bronstein was traveling around with her as well for a little while, on and off. Alex Kent, and then Wolfgang and Svet, Jacqueline, who you've had on here already. But then when I got there, Svet and Alex Kent took off to go do some work in other places. And then Carol and I just end up hanging out and going around for a month. This is also in Bucha. This is in Bordianka. There's a lot of volunteer organizations that were putting together care packages, and there was a huge crowd outside this van picking up packages.
And Ken, are you going with an idea, I want to shoot this, or you're on an assignment? What gets you there?
I got out there because I really wanted to cover the war, cover this conflict, and get the information out to everybody. I mean, there's thousands of journalists, videographers, reporters getting the information out on what Putin was doing here. And I wanted to be a part of getting that out. And I do a lot of work with Reuters, UPI, and SIPA for the most part. And I had an agreement with UPI to go out there and cover it for about maybe a month, give or take. So this is an apartment building. You can see obviously the washroom and a kitchen sink is hanging. This was an apartment building that was quite long, and the whole middle section was gone. And when I got there, they had cleaned up all of the debris that from the building that had fallen. And I just thought it was two different apartment buildings with, a space in between, but it turned out that that whole section in the middle was just completely gone. And this was one of the side walls from the exposed apartment building. So whenever there's an event like this or 9/11 or anything that destroys cars that are stuck on the road, they have to get them out of the way because emergency vehicles need to get by. People need to get by to just try to get on with their life as much as they can in spite of what's going on. So this is a parking lot in Irpin, or in Bucha, that was used for just getting rid of the cars and getting them out of the way. And they actually filmed, there's a video that was filmed here. I can't remember the name of the song. It's the one that, Ukraine won the song for the, I'm trying to remember the contest. Anyway, skip that part.
Eurovision.
Eurovision, yeah, thank you. So obviously Ukraine won first place. It was a really good, very heartwarming song. And it's pretty emotional when I hear it. Just a different view from the trees. Lots of burials and funerals.
So Ken, these descriptions down below are what you do when you send the images back home to?
Yeah, actually, I thought I had that turned off, but
but
it's no big deal. It's fine.
Don't know.
But yeah, these are the captions that I use to send these pictures to UPI.
Right. Okay.
And the second sentence usually has something to do with the story, but maybe not necessarily the photo, but what was going on at the time.
Right. So
they may not, if you go on to read the second sentence, it's not necessarily about this particular photo. So this is that infamous bridge crossing that Wolfgang was talking about. I had gotten there quite late, well after all the people had walked across. But yeah, you can see where people had walked across to the other side. The Ukrainians had blown up this bridge so that the Russians wouldn't cross. But that also left a lot of people stranded in Irpin that needed to get out. So it was a struggle for a lot of people to get out. And it just took a lot of time.
So you had a drone with you?
Yeah, I did. Like 2 days before I left, 2 other photographers wanted a drone. I wanted a drone. So called it B&H. I ordered 3 drones. So I had to bring them over with me. And then I had some flak jacket and a helmet, first aid kits, masks for other people. I had a lot of stuff to carry over for other photographers. But yeah, the drone, it's my first time using it. Technically, you're supposed to have a license, but it wasn't really an issue in Ukraine.
And does B&H, just as an aside, does B&H or any of the camera shops give you guys a discount because you're going over there to cover the war, or that is the naive question?
I didn't bother asking, but I think maybe next time I will. I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah, I don't.
I did the guy that I bought my vest from and helmet. I told him that I had left it behind for my fixer because he didn't have one. So he has all my stuff. And I told him I wanted to buy a vest and helmet for him. and he's offered to let me buy it at cost.
Okay.
So when I go over there, I'll get him a new vest and I'll get mine back. But let me go back on this drone. I flew this drone right at the very beginning before it started because they're kind of noisy. I don't want to be interrupting, and I pulled it down and it just started shooting regular photos. But during this funeral or burial, there was another drone flown by, I think it was the city government or something, that they had, there was a conflict of what was going on with the amount of people who were dying. I didn't get the whole story, but the people here weren't very happy with this drone flying, not only because it was interrupting the burial service, but they were doing it for purposes to hinder what was really going on. And this is a statue of a famous Ukrainian poet, Taras Shevchenko, from the 1800s. This is in Boryanka. So this is Easter, and this priest was blessing everybody that came up, and everybody brought in these little baskets of for gifts, fruit, bread, flowers, candles. And the people were very, very nice. They continually came up to us to hug us and thank us for being there, to telling the world their story and getting the truth out. And it was really very heartwarming. I mean, the emotions covering this war was all over the place. It was high and low. We met so many people, different situations. They invited us into their home, cooked us little bits of food, coffee. It was Easter week, so we did the I forgot what it's called. Shoot, it's on the tip of my tongue. Angelique, who's online here, she knows. We used to do it all the time for the Greek Easter. So anyway, people brought us into their home and they were celebrating that. So we would participate in the festivities and celebration. And that's Carol Guzzi's actually right there near the sun popping in there. So this is inside the church. We had soldiers and parishioners coming in to celebrate Easter. And these churches they're old, but they're beautiful. I mean, they pale in comparison with churches in the States. They're just very unique. We've got tons of artwork and paintings. It's beautiful. This is in Boryanka. Normally you don't see soldiers walking around like this. It's just usually people going in and out of their apartments to go back and find out some of their belongings. But there was a prime minister, I can't remember the country, he was visiting the area and he wanted to go in and investigate and inspect the damage and talk about his experiences and what he found here and have his little say on the news. But so there was a lot of armed security forces in the area just to make sure that everything was safe. And we had gone up into one of the buildings overlooking the courtyard where he was just prior to him getting there. We wanted to go up and get some pictures. We didn't know what was going on. We thought Zelensky was coming because we didn't know, but we had hoped that it was going to be Zelensky, but because there was tons of security. There were a lot of these guys out there, just snipers ready to cover whatever. But it turned out to be a prime minister from another country.
Yeah. So Ken, in a situation like that, is the army perturbed that they have to take care of this dignitary coming through, or the upside is the promotion of it? the propaganda of it?
I don't think they were upset. There were two particular soldiers with high-powered rifles. I think they had 50 caliber guns. We were just talking to them for a while, and they just seemed fine. There weren't. I didn't suspect any kind of
Animosity?
them being animosity for being there, having to protect somebody else from another country.
Okay.
Yeah. This is another area where another building that was just destroyed in the beginning, in the middle. This is in Irpin. The first floor of this building was just all shops. I think this was a coffee shop that we had gone into. And there's a huge courtyard in the middle there. And those blue things it's part of a playground for kids.
Mm.
And that building across the street is where I shot that previous picture from. The courtyard was just on the other side of that big building. So this whole city block was completely destroyed. And so we just went cruising through the different homes there, documenting the destruction. And once in a while, we would see somebody coming in to clean up their house or go through their belongings and just try to bring it back to some normalcy. And it was sad. Sometimes we didn't have Carol and I didn't have a translator at the time on this particular day. So we would it was a little bit of a struggle trying to talk to people and ask them what was going on. But then there's that universal language of emotion, inflection in their voice, or tears or smiles or hand gestures. And you can basically get a little bit of the right dialogue across. So this is one woman who, she was describing what she was doing when the bombs fell. I don't think she was actually at her house here. She was somewhere else where she had to duck. But it's hard to see, but on the left of the frame, there's a huge crater that it was probably 10 feet deep and 12 feet wide. And then just directly in front of her, you can see an open section that kind of goes down into a little cellar. And I mean, if she had to, or somebody had to, they can go down there and try to be protected from whatever is falling. But I took a peek inside that well. That whole wall that's on that side was bowed in about 2 feet. Yeah, about 2 feet. So if anybody was in that shelter, I don't know that it would have worked on this particular instance. So in the metro stations, there were hundreds of people in Kharkiv at the metro stations, and a lot of people had to just some people had tents, some people had just a sleeping bag and a mattress. Some didn't have any. On some of the metro stations, the cars would be there, so people would be sleeping in the cars as well. And those people who had the cars, they had a little more privacy. But a lot of people had cats. A lot of people had their dogs with them, which was, I was nice. I was impressed and happy to see that. I've been to hurricanes where people leave their dogs tied up, and you just come back after the hurricane's over and their dog is still tied up and just dead. And I see a lot of that in hurricanes in the South. And I don't know why people just up and leave their pets behind, but I was happy to see people here just very much taking care of their pets. And a little bit of therapy for kids. They're pretty traumatized. They don't really have a full grasp of everything that's going on. Some do, some don't, but obviously this is pretty good therapy for them. And I think it's probably even good therapy for the adults and parents to just look at this and just try to get maybe a smile on their face for a little while, watch the kids post their artwork up. This is inside the metro.
And it's all, I mean, they're always very neat, to the point that Wolfgang was making, whether it's a destruction of, here they're all living in the train station, but I know you have another shot of everything just lined up nice and neat and civilized.
Yeah, I think it's a must when you're in a situation like this, because if you didn't have any organization or cleanliness or, just keeping things scattered, it would be a mess down there. And then people would be all upset, emotions would go crazy and there would be fights. One of the metro stations we went down, some of these people thought that once we photographed down there, that the city would get bombed right afterwards. And they think it's because of the press, but it's just a coincidence because they were bombing the city anyway, just randomly. And then one guy was pretty drunk and belligerent and just not wanting any of the press down there. So we didn't bother with it. We didn't want to upset anybody down there. So we just left and went over to a different metro station.
So they're thinking that you guys are there and that the world knows that you're there, so they're not going to bomb while you're there.
Well, I think some people think that, once we take a picture and then transmit it, whether it's TV or stills, the following day or hours later, they get bombed or nearby. I mean, I don't think any of these metro stations really got hit hard that I'm aware of, but they think that it's because of the press. But we really didn't think it was that case. It's just a coincidence because the Russians were just bombing intermittently throughout the place. I was down in this, I don't know if it was this station or not, but ran into Paula Bronstein shooting, and then went to talk to her. And then she was covering this one family that had this nice little table set up, and they were cooking some potato soup. And they insisted that I have some, and I really didn't want to eat up the remaining little bit of food that they have. And they kept insisting. And so I thought, okay. So I had the soup, and it was like the best soup I've ever had. It was so good. I couldn't put it down. But people were so friendly. They were just, like I said before, they're hugging you, thanking you for being there. They're very, very nice people.
Yeah, that's the shot. So where are you standing on this shot, Ken?
Well, it's just like, well, I know in DC, I don't know whoever's on here, what other cities, like a lot of times there's an upper level, then you go down the escalator to the main platform. So this is shot from one of the upper levels. It had a viewing space.
I mean,
there were people in every nook and cranny that you can think of.
Yeah, even on this ledge on the left, I didn't see it before. I see it now. It's all lined up just so.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yep. They finally cleaned them up. I mean, I think I have a picture where the mayor comes in and talks. So at one point in this town, Riska-Lasova, they had just liberated this town, and they were taking the people out of there in vans and cars, and they would take them out of the van and check their security, check their IDs, make sure everything is on the up and up. And occasionally, there might be a Russian sympathizer that they were really keeping an eye out for. That's what they wanted to check IDs for. And then this is one guy that they suspected. They hauled him off to the side somewhere. I'm sure they questioned him. I don't know what happened to the guy, if he was let go or detained. It happened real quickly. And this is some of the people that are coming off they were transporting them in whatever vehicles they can. Like this is a big industrial truck. Sometimes it's a car, sometimes it's a little bus. This is a school, an elementary school, or I think is maybe 8th or 9th grade. I think this guy was the principal at the school, but he gave us a look around the school to witness the damages. So several schools had been hit by the Russians. I mean, they're just all over the place. And this is one of maybe 6 or 7 craters left. They're way behind there in the back, behind those trees. There's like 4 more.
So how is it, Ken, like in a shot like that, that the windows are not shattered, and in other shots they're all shattered?
Well, I guess that just
Luck?
depends on luck, really. Yeah, because you can see some of those windows that back there are fine, and then some of them directly above his head, that's just
Right.
blown away. I guess it's sheer luck, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is in, like Wolfgang was saying, some of these apartment buildings are the old Soviet era where it's just like a block of cement. There's no design factor whatsoever. There's this, like, just a little bit northeast of Kharkiv, still in Kharkiv, but like on the edges of town. There's a whole bunch of apartment buildings. They had been hit pretty hard. And as he had said before, in other places, it happens all over the place where people just don't want to leave, especially the elderly. They're set in their ways. They don't want to leave, whether it's, they just planted tomatoes or whatever it is. They just don't want to leave. So they don't. So this is a couple. Are you seeing the whole frame or not?
Yes.
No.
Yeah, we have the whole thing.
Because I'm getting cut off by the pictures of everybody. Anyway, so the guy on the right and the woman in the middle, they were just putting together their nice little lunch. And this guy came in and decided he'd hang up the Ukrainian flag.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing that, in this situation, you need a tablecloth to make it so.
Well, it certainly helps the whole atmosphere because, I mean,
Yeah.
it looks like a nice romantic little picnic
does.
cloth, like the typical picnic thing. And you got a candle. Yeah, I mean, they make the best of what they have. So a lot of these people, and we'll get into some other pictures of another woman, another babushka, who, like these people, probably they live maybe on the upper floors, but there's no electricity, so the elevators aren't running. They're old and elderly, so they can't really take the stairs as much as they could before. So they end up having to just live in the basement, and these are like dirt floors. Pipes going through. So this is Sasha. This is another apartment building. As you can see, just dirt floors. And he had, I think he had 6 kittens in that tent in the back. This is Ludmila with her cat Meow Meow. She was so sweet. She also lives in the basement of this building with Sasha, the other guy that was in the other photo. She lived on the 8th floor. She has bad knees. She never leaves. She never goes more than like 20 meters from the door of this apartment building to the basement, because the whole area, even while we were there, we could hear shelling going on nearby because we were pretty close to the Russian border at this time. Because like Kharkiv is like 40 kilometers to the Russian border, and then the Russians were well within that border, maybe halfway. So there definitely was a lot of shelling going on.
I mean, this is a really beautiful shot. I mean, you could see how beautiful this woman is. Her skin is so beautiful.
She was such a sweetheart. We cried when we had to say goodbye to her.
Wow, she is stunningly beautiful.
She was just the sweetest. People would come over and just donate food. So this is like just in front of her building.
Mm.
People were bringing flowers. So at one point while we were there, we heard some shelling going on pretty close. So we wanted to go investigate. We saw this big plume of smoke, and then just like Wolfgang had to do, try to get somebody to let him into a building. I don't think we had to run into anybody to let us into a building. We just had to find a building that had a door that was open. And then we had to take the stairs all the way up. It was a bit of a hike, definitely got our steps in. But this was, I think somebody said it might have been a gas station. We're not really sure. So one of the things when it was brought to my attention, you just think, oh yeah, of course, that makes sense. But city after city around the world, they all have a zoo or an eco park of some sort. So this was this was the owner's house of Feldman Eco Park, which is on the northeastern part of Kharkiv. And the Russians, when they started shelling everywhere, a lot of these animals died, a lot of them. And so immediately staff and other volunteers, and I think the guy in the middle of the red shirt, I think he's a volunteer veteran. So they had a lot of people go in and volunteer. They had a lot of large turtles that the owner of the house was keeping them stored in a room next to the pool. Like he had an indoor pool. So there was maybe 15 of these turtles. So they had to put them in a wheelbarrow and then take them out to the van and then load them up at the van. And they're going to take all these animals to Poltava. Is it in here? Yeah, Poltava, sorry, which is about 2 hours away. And I think there was another zoo up there that they were going to use to keep these animals safe for the time being. So pigs and boars were the other thing that they had to try to rescue. They just had to herd them like cattle into the back of a truck.
Wow.
So we would gone to this park a couple of different days, and on this particular day, when we go to the park, we're going down this highway, and then you get off on this exit, you make a U-turn, and you come back. And just before we got to the park, on the right-hand side, there was a Ukrainian tank, and just sitting off the side of the highway. And after we made the U-turn, we came back into the Feldman Park. We, at that point, were just kind of right across the highway from this tank. And while we're filming this, I was shooting this with my long lens, and I'm just panning this guy. I'm keeping my eye on this guy and the llama. And I didn't even know that this unexploded ordnance was there. I didn't notice it was there until like after I was editing the pictures. But it's a miracle that these guys didn't accidentally run into it. So while we were there, the tank had fired into the Russian territory, and what happens after that is they're going to retaliate. So they did, and well, they were getting a couple more ostriches into the back of the bus. So they retaliated, and at one point, it was very close to where we were, so we had to take shelter real quick into this this little shed right here on the left. So that's everybody running in for cover. So what ended up happening was, so we ended up going in here for about 15 seconds, 20 seconds, and then we felt like it was necessary for us to get to the van and get back into the rest of the park. We had broken off into two different groups. There was a group going in to rescue some of the animals, and then there was another group that we were following that was going to a different part of the park and another adjacent parking lot where we were to fix a truck to get the buffalo on, because one of the other set of animals that we were trying to rescue this day was the buffalo. And so just after we got the buffalo into a pen, some heavy shelling came really close, so we had to dive. And then after about 30 seconds, we figured it was okay to get up, and we're on our way back to the parking lot with this other group of ours. And we got the call that three of them had been hit and three of them were injured. So we ran up to the parking lot, we had to ditch again, and then back into the vans. And then we followed the other car that had the three injured. In the car, we followed them to the emergency room at the hospital. So there were two adults that got hit, and sadly there was a a young kid who's only 15. He got hit the worst, and this is him. He had just coming out of the vehicle. He got hit severely. He didn't make it. He only lasted like another 20 minutes. It's really sad because he's 15 years old and he was an only child. And this is one of the other injured party. So while we were out there, just after we came out of the hospital, these military troops had come up with these two Russian soldiers. One of them was severely injured and they took him into the hospital. But we're trying to put two and two together, and we somehow thought perhaps that these guys were in cahoots with giving coordinates to the Russians where we were. But in reality, I think it was the Russian, it was the Ukrainian tank that when it launched into Russia, they just retaliated to where we were, and we just happened to be in the proximity of the shelling. We didn't purposely go into any shelling situations to chase any of that, but war is everywhere, and sometimes it comes to you. So it turns out that these guys, the Ukrainian soldiers had just come across these guys who were either Russian soldiers or sympathizers. And so they were detaining this guy, and the other guy was severely wounded and was in the hospital.
So, in that little scenario there, Ken, it's just by the luck of the draw, you're that young 15-year-old or anybody else.
Yeah. They were part of our group, and we were just separated by not very far, because they were with a group that were trying to go fix the truck that we were going to use to get the buffalo out. So this is the mother and father of the child. They just got the news that he didn't make it, and so he was consoling her. But I didn't get the picture. I was doing something else, and she ended up being really upset at him and was hitting him because I think he had sort of allowed him to come out and volunteer with the kids, but so she was pretty upset. So back into the apartments in Kharkiv. No, this is Irpin, sorry. You go into some of these apartment buildings and you just see, like a bed, a couch or whatever. But then when you see the parents' master bedroom and then the crib next to them, that they obviously had some kid there, and we just hope that they got out okay. All these apartments had beautiful wallpaper. This is just outside of Kharkiv. The whole back area had just been hit recently. They didn't have time to clean it up. So they're just trying to get out with their dog. Whatever remaining things that they can have, they can bring out. And so this is some of the group that we were with for the animal rescue in Eco Park. We came across an area where they were donating blood, so we all decided we'd donate. And that on the left, that's Dima, our fixer. We ended up having to leave pretty soon after this. I think only one of our guys got to donate a little bit of blood. Something, I can't remember what happened, but we decided we needed to go somewhere else real quick. So then we wanted to go over to the regular cemetery in Kharkiv. It's a very big cemetery. It's not the place. Most of the burials that we were covering were in Bucha and Irpin. But this guy and his girlfriend decided to come and visit his father, who had died, I think, just 3 days into the war. Yeah. This guy is a farmer. He owns this place, and he had about 80 different cows and pigs die in the attacks. And oddly enough, this cow must have just gotten so scared that it literally jumped through the window. That's where he ended up. So he had that whole building behind him was like, I think that was used for cows and pigs, feeders. There's a lot of feeders in there. And Valtivka, where was this? Yeah, Vilhivka, just outside of Kharkiv on the east. There was a dead Russian soldier. Oh, and one of the Russians use drones to search for locations to hit, and I'm sure that, and I'm sure the Ukrainians are doing the same thing. And so we didn't feel comfortable flying a drone too close to the Russian border or where the Russians are, because they evidently have the technology with the Chinese technology, because the Chinese make a lot of the parts for the DJI drones. And so the Russians have the technology to track the drones. And so whether it's a military drone or if it's a journalist flying a drone, they can track them and they know where they are. So we didn't want to be too close and have them track our drone. But at one point, I guess the crew that we were with felt it was okay. Just after this, I saw a drone up in the air and I thought, oh my God. So I immediately asked our crew if it was theirs, and they said it was. So I was relieved. But then we didn't spend much time here. We left soon after that.
So the Ukrainians when they find the Russian body, do they do something with it? Because I assume at some point all the bodies get changed, traded back, right? I mean,
Yeah. There's a few pictures coming up where Malarahan was a small village outside of it's actually near where this one was. Oh, this is from Malarahan. They found some bodies and they dug them up, and I guess they returned them. But this is a ridge line, kind of out on the outskirts of Kharkiv. There's a roadway that goes into Kharkiv, and the Russians were up on that tree line, bunkered down. And you can see one of the turrets that fell off, and then the tank is right behind it. And I imagine these potholes are from Ukrainian bombing to try to get rid of the Russians. And sometimes damage in villages are not necessarily from the Russians, because the Russians will occupy the village and then the Ukrainians have to fight and attack the village to get the Russians out. So sometimes the damage is not necessarily from the Russians. So I was going to say one more thing on this. The Russians were using this as an artillery point where they were just right above the highway and they could just pick off vehicles that were going into Kharkiv. And this is in Malarahan. This is a bunker. I was just trying to make it look pretty. This is a Russian helicopter that crashed back in March. I think when it initially crashed, it was earlier on in the year and none of this grass had even been grown. It was like all a dirt field back at the time. And see where the Z is in white in that whole section to the right? That was all intact. It had the configuration number on it or whatever insignia. And that was all intact in the beginning when this helicopter crashed. And over the period of a few months or whatever, somebody had decided to take those insignia letters off for whatever reason. We don't know. And that's just a drone shot of the same thing.
Wow.
This is a turret from the tank, popped off. I didn't know that, Wolfgang, I didn't know that that's why they pop off so easily. So in this town of Malarahan, I was with this Spanish TV crew. We're in the backyard talking to this one guy, and out of nowhere, these two civilian guys come running back and a military, I think he was with public PR. They came running back and they had gotten information that there was a Russian body buried in the backyard. So they dug that body up and then brought it out. And then they got word that there were two other ones. And so these are the two other bodies that they had just unburied. And, you know, when things like this happen in a civilian neighborhood, it brings out onlookers. And so these teenage kids and other people were just hanging around watching. I think it's a little graphic here. So these are Russian soldiers with their hands tied. And, you know, there was all this talk about how the Russians are tying the hands of some of the Ukrainian soldiers and torturing them, or, you know, rumors are always going out everywhere. But you never know. It could be the other way around too. And this is kind of proof, I guess, you know, the Ukrainians had tied these guys' hands up as well. And then they put them in bags and then put them in the ambulance and took them off, and they'll categorize them and try to get the bodies back to Russia, I guess.
Is that like a human element to this whole thing? Like still doing the right thing or the respectful thing? Even
I believe I believe that's true. Plus the military law that I forgot the name of it, but you know, where they, you know, yeah. So they try to keep things, you know, within reason and, you know, be a bit of a humanitarian. And this is a guy in the same neighborhood. He was just going over his experiences. He has a lot of canned fruit, bottled fruit. So we decided to go back into the metro and do a little bit more. And we just got lucky that the mayor of Kharkiv came down to talk to the people and just tell them what was going on. They're trying to basically get people cleared out of the metro, because at this point, it was getting a little bit safer for people to go back home. If you had a home to go back to, or if you had to leave the metro, you have to find some place to go to. So he had a lot of statements to give to people, and they had a lot of questions for him as well, which makes sense. And I wanted to give a big shout out to the crew that I hung out with a lot during this time. This is in Malarahan. That section to the left is where they had dug up those two Russian bodies. But this is, on the left is Dima. He was our fixer and driver. And then Roger in the back with his cat. He was about to adopt that cat and take it home. He's with the Spanish TV crew. He's one of the reporters. And the guy in front is the videographer. And then the guy in the copper pants is a award-winning documentary photographer, filmmaker, Justin. And in the back is Max. He was the Spanish crew's driver. And then you've got Carol Guzzi, and then Nuri on the right. She was another reporter with the Spanish crew. But I just wanted to thank them very much because they were like the best team to hang out with. We hung out with them for about 2 weeks, I think. We all stayed at the Park Hotel, and you know, we all share information and become buds. And there's a lot of bonding between journalists when you're covering heavy stuff like this. Our hotel had people from Italy, France, Spain, Germany, Japan, you know, lots of places. But it was great. There's a lot of camaraderie going on.
Yeah,
But
again, someone has a question. The dead bodies of Russian soldiers are stripped of clothing and shoes. Is this how the Russians leave them, or are the Ukrainians doing this?
Say it again.
It appeared that on a bunch of the photographs that the Russian soldiers were stripped of their clothes and shoes. Is this something that the Russians do when they leave them, or is that what the Ukrainians are doing?
I don't know. I never came across anything like that. These guys all had their clothes on.
Okay.
I don't know. I haven't heard that, or I haven't seen that either. That's it. I wanted to give my shout out to my peeps there for the big support, camaraderie.
And how
Great
long
work, Ken.
will you travel? How long will you travel with these folks, Kenny?
With these guys, it was about 2 weeks. We just made friends while we were at the hotel because, you know, we all go down and sit down in the same place for dinner, and you end up talking to somebody next to you, and he's like, well, where are you guys going tomorrow? We've got this tip on this is happening. And it's like, okay, we're only 2 people. Do you mind if we come with you guys? You're a bigger crew. And we, you know, safety in numbers. And so sometimes, like Dima, our driver, you know, he had family in Kharkiv. So sometimes he'd go and spend time with them. And then Carol and I decided we wanted to go out, go do something. So we would go with the Spanish crew. On this particular day, Carol had stayed behind. She needed to get some rest. And then she caught up with us later after this. But yeah, there's a lot of bonding, and we share a lot of information for the most part. You know, there's some organizations that don't want to give out any information. They want to keep things very exclusive.
Right. Is that your last slide, Kenny?
Yep.
Yeah. So a question for both of you guys. What do you do when you come back home, you know, to deal with your own stress and, you know, all the things that you've seen? How do you, you know, get back to just, you know, going to a coffee shop and, you know, waiting online and, you know, someone giving you an attitude and all of a sudden here you are?
I didn't have any emotional problems. I often think about that. Like, am I bottling it up and keeping it in and not saying anything? I know I keep a check on my emotions a little bit. Am I getting too edgy? Am I jumping off the cliff at some stupid remark somebody makes? And I don't think I've come across any of that. I'm okay so far, I think. The only thing that I did notice is that there was a storm that came into DC, and the thunder and lightning. I used to never be bothered by thunder and lightning, and then all of a sudden, it was different this time. I mean,
All right.
it did bring back memories, because we got, I mean, that one close call was very, very close at the zoo, and then we had like 4 other ones where they were pretty close. So the thunder and lightning.
All of a sudden you heard it.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's like, you know, you do a belly flop off the high dive and you're very reluctant to go do it again.
Mm.
So that, Wolfgang, have you had any? You were out there for quite some time, much
Yeah.
longer than.
Yes, from the initial trip was like 4.5 months. So I think a lot of the harder days that I dealt with, I was with a good group of friends and colleagues, and I think that and then was fortunate enough in these events, like you get to work alongside people who have been doing this for years and decades and this is not their first rodeo. But got to like talk through everything that is on my chest or like weighing on me, like while there, I think. And then kind of the last like little bit that I was there, it was on the first trip, it was like a calm, like 2 weeks. So everything had for the most part been processed, but I did have quite a few similar things, not with like noise since I've been back, but from the amount of like fires after strikes, like you would have, Ukraine's flat for the most part. So you'll see these like smoke clouds coming from whatever had been hit along the horizon in different areas. And this was really prevalent in the first couple months of the war, like you'd see them all over. And when I came back, anytime that I live in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, and it's like quite hilly in the area. So like driving through the city or like outside of the city, like you'd catch a little low cloud that's like very dark, and it's just like, wait, did shelling happen? Like was something dark over here? And then like have to be like, wait, I'm in Philadelphia. That certainly did not happen. But one day I was I saw this and I was explaining it to a friend that I was driving with. And we turned like a couple streets, and I'm just like, yeah, like this is like the world. Like, I don't know, like I just see this now and think like shelling happened, something's on fire. And then sure enough, there was like a massive fire like down the street. And I was like, this is just like life gaslighting me on what's happening now.
And so you live through these experiences and you're with other colleagues. Do you see sometimes, or are there signs when you recognize one of my colleagues is going too far or taking too many risks? You know, how does that brotherhood sort of help each other in those situations? Because I assume at some point somebody must have a bad moment while you're there.
Yeah, I think whether it's like emotional, people are like more tense. Like we all had days where like I've snapped at colleagues and friends and like had to apologize for it later just because like I had some buildup on not getting things out for a few days or hours or whatever. Or in the instance that someone has a higher threshold for risk than other people in the group. I think you just sort of figure that out with who you're around, and you try and be around people that are more complementary to what you're accepting of. But I wanted to touch on whoever it was who had asked about John Benizhno. Sorry if I said your last name wrong. The bodies of the Russians. So whether it's civilians or Ukrainian soldiers that find them, they'll like root through the pockets, take like look for like any like ID or if there's like ammo. The Ukrainian military takes, if there's ammunition around, they're stripping that. If there's like plates and like their plate carriers and armor, they're taking that. Like they don't really use the helmets, but anything that can be useful, they need supplies, so they're taking that. So that can sometimes explain why like shirts are opened and like pockets are like flipped inside out. And then the shoes, this was a major issue for the Russians, is how they were supplied coming in winter. Some of these bodies, like the last one that Ken showed us, was severely bloated. That body had been out there for weeks or like a month, maybe longer, just sitting in the sun and inflating. In the winter time, the Russians weren't equipped with proper winter gear. So there was widespread like looting of people's homes for winter shoes, or a lot of soldiers would be, the POW that I interacted with in Irpin had sneakers on that he had stolen. He was lamenting to the Ukrainian soldiers about how this is bullshit. He wasn't given what he needs, and was like kind of just saying all the things that like we've kind of seen in text messages and whatnot on Russian supplies not being adequate for the situation. So it could very well have been that he was I don't know the situation too. Sometimes like when you're just like hanging out in a trench, you're not wearing your combat boots all day, you might just be wearing slippers, and then the events unfold while you're not completely prepared for them. So it could be any number of things. I don't know necessarily. Maybe sometimes they do just get stripped and whatever for whatever unfortunate reasons that we would like to not think are happening, but that entirely does. But then there are also like practical reasons for why that's happening.
Yeah. Also insignias, I think there are certain insignias that certain special, for lack of a better word, maybe special forces or whatever of the Russians, they have certain insignias that designate that they're maybe a sharpshooter. So if they come across these Russian bodies, they also look for those insignias so they can identify, okay, we know what kind of people were over here. They're not just regular soldiers. They might be special, whatever, special ops, something like that.
So if like, can you shed a little light on your experiences with the local people, with the Ukrainians, you know, as far as, you know, their morale, their spirit, you know, that type of thing?
For us, we stayed at this really nice hotel in Kyiv, and then in Kharkiv, we stayed at the Park Hotel. That hotel was a lot of the people, not I'd say there's a good handful maybe of some of the staff at that hotel were living in the hotel in the regular meeting rooms that they had to be like changed into a place to stay, throwing in an extra cot or a mattress for them to sleep on. For whatever reason, some of their homes were either destroyed or I don't know, for whatever reason, they had to leave their home and stay in the hotel. And so some of these people had their kids with them working and their parents working at the hotel. And they were just the best people. They were very supportive. They would bend over backwards to help you. give you a little extra food. They're very, very nice people. And they were, I'm still in touch with some of them at the Park Hotel, checking in on them and making sure that everything's okay. But they'll tell me like, we're still getting shelled a lot more than when we were there.
Okay, great. And if anyone else has any questions, you can put them into the chat room. But I have to say, everyone is so appreciative of both of you for shedding this light and giving us some insight into what's going on and admiring your courage and your work and on and on and on. I can't thank you enough. Wolfgang, do you have a closing comment?
I'll just answer that last question that you had about the people in Ukraine in closing.
Okay.
Like, I think that in my time there, like, it started out, and I think that anyone here from like the Upper East Coast and the Rust Belt would feel like very at home quickly with like when you first interact with Ukrainians, and I think Slavs in general have like this very like cold, suspicious, seemingly like aggressive demeanor at first. And like, if you're from New York or you're from Philly, it's just like, these are like the Irish and Italians that I know. And it's very much like that, but like within moments of like interacting with someone, they are so hospitable and so inviting. And like, what Ken was talking about with this, like, I had the best soup of my life, like dozens of times while in Ukraine, like whether it's borscht or the potato or the pea soups or like salo or whatever it is that people are cooking, like the home cooked meals and like the invitations to share like what little someone has left is just like the most heartwarming, inviting. Some of the best moments I've had in life have been there. And there's also like this underlying, but I touched on it earlier, like the unity and like the persistence in that country to strive to not only beat Russia, but be something better, since we're at a very special moment in history for this country where it's not just like today, it's kind of been like writing history since 90s, like when Ukraine in this era became its own sovereign nation. I know that it's much older than Russia and it's been around since pre-Viking times, but in the past, since the wall fell, they've been striving to make their own national identity. And I feel how we're looking at it now is like, this is more of kind of the final act of like their revolution and like their independence and like severing the tie from Russia and not just moving westward, but becoming Ukraine as like its own thing, its own completely like independent nation state. And although that's all on paper, I think that it's really a fascinating thing to see the development of that and them forming their own identity that'll be separate from the West and it'll be separate from Russia. And it's really awe-inspiring, and I think that it's gonna be amazing to watch this unfold in the coming years and decades, and see where Ukraine is at once this is all over, and hopefully soon.
Can I give you the last word?
No, I feel the same. I'm just incredibly thankful to the Ukrainian people for being so hospitable to having us in their backyard so constantly. And, we all hope that this ends soon. It's just a sad moment. It's very sad that that the Ukrainians are being treated this way. But we hope it all ends soon.
Well, and I really have to echo those words, because I have very dear friends who are Ukrainian and who are watching tonight. And my dear friend told me I better mention how wonderful the Ukrainian families are that I know. So without getting myself in trouble, I can only echo those words. The people that I know that are Ukrainian are the salt of the earth, and they very much are part of the motivation to keep doing these weeks of having folks like you guys coming in and showing us what's going on, so we don't forget, and letting the voices be heard. So again, I really appreciate you guys doing this. You have a standing offer when you come back and have new work and new vision. Let me know. I want to have you back, and if there's anything you guys want to promote from any standpoint, there's always a platform for you guys to present, because we've had people come on 2 and 3 different times. So again, I can't really thank you guys enough for being here. And tomorrow night is our final night of this week with Carol Guzzi, who I'm sure will be equally as inspiring. And thank you guys very, very much.